Hello, what is going on, everybody? It's Max here from the Mama's Legacy podcast. Now I'm joined here from the man Alex from Alex Hoops YouTube. Introduce yourself, man. He's at 9.4 subscribers. I mean, obviously, go subscribe to him if you aren't yet, but I'm gonna guarantee most of my subscribers are if they're into basketball content. But hey, man, how you doing? And tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Yeah, just I make NBA content, just kind of covering all the stuff going on in the NBA. I do a lot of player profiles, team breakdowns, film breakdowns, stuff like that. Yeah, very fortunate that it's gone as well as it has so far. But yeah, appreciate you having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on, guys. Links to the channel will be in the description. He just uploaded D'Angelo Russell video, if I'm not mistaken, unless you've done another
Yep.
upload on me.
No, that's the most recent one.
Well, yeah, make sure you guys go in, check that out, and let's jump first into first. The Brooklyn Nets broke up their big three, which I actually think for first time in a while it's a win-win for both sides. But we'll start on the Sixers side since we've seen Harden play so far. James Harden and Joel Embiid look like arguably the best duo in the league right now. I think they both complement each other very well. I think Joel Embiid could be what the Rockets thought they were going to bring Dwight Howard in to be for
Mhm.
James Harden. And honestly, I think this is a second piece where Harden might actually have a chance to win a championship. I know the past couple of years we've been
Mm.
saying Chris Paul could have won it if he didn't tear his hamstring, but that's the only other season that I've really said, hey, James Harden, somebody else can win the championship. Obviously, the Brooklyn Big Three, they could if they all play together, but they obviously didn't very much. But what are your initial thoughts on seeing James Harden and Joel Embiid play together?
I think like a lot of other people, I had some concerns about the whole fit thing. We as NBA fans, especially when it comes to star players, we like to analyze, how well are these players going to fit together? Do their strengths really complement each other that well? So I had some concerns going into it. Um, you know, James Harden is a very pick and roll heavy point guard. He's always played with these rim running big men. Obviously, operating a lot in the pick and roll, kicking out to shooters, throwing up lobs, things like that. And Joel Embiid, he's a guy who's never really been huge as a pick and roll big man. He's typically being fed in the post. Normally in these pick and roll situations, he's more often than not popping out to the perimeter, which with James Harden, it was going to be a question of how well are these guys going to fit together. Is it going to take some adjustment? How well do their strengths really complement one another? And from what I've seen so far, my concerns have been put to bed. Joel Embiid is just so skilled that if you need him to run the pick and roll, he can run the pick and roll. Even though it's never been a huge part of his game, we know that he can do it. And with James Harden, from what we've seen so far, they play off of each other very, very nicely. Joel Embiid, as a big man in the post, has gotten really, really good at passing out of the post and finding cutters, throwing out to shooters. His playmaking has really improved a lot. And when you have a guy like James Harden, who it sounds like James Harden doesn't necessarily want to be, uh, the primary guy anymore. It sounds like he's more focused on facilitating for others. He can turn his offense on when he needs to, but as of right now, it doesn't seem like that's his main goal. And obviously, what we saw in that game against the Knicks, where him and Joel Embiid were just going crazy, scoring in ridiculous numbers. They are definitely guys who are going to go to the line a lot, and I know that frustrates a lot of people. It frustrates me as a viewer because it's not fun to watch. I don't think anyone's going to sit here and say that they enjoy watching guys take a ton of free throws, but at the same time, from their perspective, their goal is to win games, and if to win a game you need to get to the line, if that is how you're going to be able to get the most points, more points than the other team to win the game, then so be it. And until there's something done from the league's point of view to kind of negate that being a go-to option for them, then I don't blame them for using it. They're both very, very good at it. They're both very, very good at drawing contact. And while it can be a little bit frustrating as a viewer, it wins them games, which is really all they care about.
hmm I agree. I think another thing is Joel Embiid's game is only going to get better. I know that, every year we watch him, we're like, oh God, did he get this much better? Did he get this much better? But
Mm-hmm.
for the longest time watching Joel Embiid play, the thing I've been saying, hey, if you get Joel Embiid a guard that isn't afraid to score and can take over the game when need be, this team's going to be killer. Problem is with Ben Simmons,
Mhm.
it kind of nullified a little bit of Joel Embiid's game. Joel Embiid, one-on-one in the paint, nobody can stop him. And the problem with Ben Simmons being on the team is Joel Embiid had to get out of the paint to let Ben Simmons score because Ben Simmons is scoring nowhere outside of 2 feet around the basket. So with Joel
Right.
Embiid taking more shots outside the paint than he would like, granted he's a pretty damn good shooter for a center, but even then, one-on-one in the paint, he's not getting stopped. And when he's not able to go one-on-one in the paint every couple possessions, it's really taken away a bunch of points from your team as a whole. At the end of the game, you're going to look back and go, oh, damn, they lost by 4 points. Well, if Joel Embiid has 3 more possessions in the paint, they win that game. Less
Mhm.
shots to Ben Simmons, bam, you've won it. But with James Harden finally being on the team, the defenses aren't just worried about Joel Embiid. They have to worry about another league scorer, past league scorer. James Harden, he's really elevated this game. I think he's going to be the reason why Joel Embiid ends up winning the MVP this year. And I think there isn't a better match made in heaven for a duo pair. Also, I mean, the fact that the Sixers didn't have to give up Thibault or Maxey was a
Right.
huge plus for the Sixers. I think
Mhm.
all of us thought either Thibault or Maxey would be gone, but the fact that they were able to keep them two was a big plus in this trade. Now, looking over at the Nets side of things, I also think they won that trade. You're the Brooklyn Nets. You have
Mhm.
James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving. There's only one basketball, and KD, Harden, and Kyrie want to shoot. Even though we mentioned earlier that James Harden wouldn't mind being the second option, I don't think he would go as far to say he'd be happy as the third option. The
Right.
uh, the thing is, I think Ben Simmons fits that role perfectly. Ben Simmons can dribble the ball down court when need be, pass the ball to you, and he'll play defense like nobody else. Let's not act like Ben Simmons isn't a top 5 defender in this league when
Mhm.
he's playing. And
Right.
he just fits that perfect third man role for a championship team. The only thing now, obviously, is Kyrie's availability with the COVID shot and all that. But other than that, when this team's fully healthy and playing a full season together, I have no doubt in my mind that they won't reach the finals.
Yeah, and you touched on it with James Harden. One of the things I kind of harped on, I did a video on that whole trade, and one of the things I harped on was with Kyrie. It doesn't apply to Kevin Durant as much, but with Kyrie and James Harden, you know, those are two guards. They're two scoring guards. Obviously, James Harden is one of the best passers in the league. No one's going to deny that, but he is also a scoring guard as well. So when you have him and Kyrie on the floor together, he's not a bad passer, but it's certainly not something he's looking to do. When Kyrie has the ball and he's in an ISO situation, he's not looking to pass. He is looking to score the ball using his handle and his skill. And when you have James Harden, it kind of turns the offensive side of the ball from a 5-on-5 situation to a 4-on-5 situation, and even a 3-on-5 situation when you take into account that Kevin Durant is also on the floor. Um, you know, only one guy is going to be able to take a shot at the end of a possession. You can't have two guys taking a shot in one possession. So it's like Kyrie Irving and James Harden, while they are both very, very, very good players, their strengths clash, in my opinion, a little bit too much, and it kind of takes away. You're not getting the most from either of them when you have both of them on the floor at the same time because they each have to account for one another. So getting Ben Simmons opens up a ton of opportunities because obviously Ben Simmons' primary goal is rarely to shoot the basketball. I don't think that's a secret anymore. I think we all realize now that, Ben Simmons doesn't go into a possession thinking that he's going to score the basketball. Unless it's a transition opportunity, which Ben Simmons does very well scoring in, uh, he's not going to look to score on any given half court possession. And I think that works perfectly with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving because Ben Simmons can do so many things with the ball in his hand to create open looks for these guys. It's taking attention off of them, and when you have a guy like Ben Simmons who can operate as a screener and work off of the ball with Kyrie and Kevin Durant, I think it's just going to open up a ton of offensive opportunities in a half court setting. And I just think overall, offensively, the fit is fantastic. And then obviously on the defensive end, it's even better. I mean, James Harden, is not a great defender. I don't think me saying that is going to piss off too many people. I don't think anyone's going to be in the comments saying, "Oh, James Harden is actually a great defender, and here's why." But it's no secret James Harden is not a great defender.
Mhm.
So while they do sacrifice the scoring and the playmaking to an extent that James Harden provided, the things that they made up for by acquiring Ben Simmons really kind of, I don't want to say it cancels it out because, James Harden, I think everyone would agree, is a better player than Ben Simmons, but Ben Simmons does fit that team really, really well, and he's going to be able to provide a ton for them. They're going to be able to run some really interesting small ball lineups that I'm super excited to watch with Ben Simmons at the center position. And that doesn't even take into account them getting Seth Curry in the
Mhm.
trade. Seth Curry is, people don't realize this, Seth Curry is a top, I think, top 5 or 6 mid-range scorer in the NBA right now.
Mhm.
He's one of only, I think, 7 players in the entire NBA that is shooting over 50% in the mid-range on more than like 3.5 attempts per game. So you have a guy like that who is kind of an underrated scoring threat. And you put that with Kyrie Irving, you put that with Ben Simmons, you put that with Kevin Durant, and that's getting to be a really scary starting lineup. And with Seth Curry, adding him to the mix, he's an off-ball shooter. He's not a guy who is looking to create his own shot on a given possession. He's looking to be ready when he gets the ball, pump fake, get the defender to bite on the pump fake, then get inside the arc and maybe take a mid-range or get to the basket, and then the wide open catch and shoot threes that he's going to be getting from Ben Simmons and Kyrie and KD. It's going to be just a match made in heaven for them. I really like this trade. They recouped a ton of their losses from the original James Harden trade when they went out and got him. Obviously, they're not getting all those picks back. They gave up, I think it was like 4 or 5 first round picks,
Mhm.
some of those being pick swaps. And, they didn't get all of that back. But the fact that they were able to get some picks, including this year, they'll get a first round pick. And then I believe in 2027, they get another first round pick that has top 1 through 8 protection for the 76ers. So they could end up with another lottery pick in 2027. And who knows what the Sixers are going to look like at that point. So all in all, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think this is a win-win for both sides.
Yeah, it's very rare that you see that nowadays. But
Right.
another thing
Especially when
is,
star players are involved.
yeah, no, whenever it's a star player once disgruntled, they get traded out for a bag of chips compared to what their value should be. That's typically what it is all the time. I mean, you could make an argument that Houston fumbled the bag in the Harden trade.
Right.
I tend to agree with that, but a lot of
I,
people,
I would agree as well. I
yeah.
think the fact that they didn't keep Jarrett Allen, the fact that they didn't keep Karis LeVert, and
Hmm.
instead got Victor Oladipo, that it's still hard for me to wrap my head around that. The only logic I can think of is that they wanted to save money, and Jarrett Allen was up for a payday, which he ended up getting, rightfully so. He's easily a top 10 center in the NBA this year,
Hmm.
and he's a fantastic player. I love Jarrett Allen, but yeah, Houston fumbled big time not keeping him.
Yeah, even then, I mean, they probably could have kept him and flipped him for more than Victor Oladipo because they ended up
Right.
flipping him for Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk. So that tells you a lot about
Mm.
the trade value on him. But something that I dread talking about is my Lakers right now. As much as a die-hard Laker fan I am, I understand when we're playing terrible basketball, and it seems to me like we've been doing that basically all season long now. Are you at all confident that the Lakers will even make the play-in game?
So I've been putting a lot of thought into that, um, and you never want to bet against LeBron James. LeBron James, you know, I think everyone, regardless of where you put him, to almost everyone, he's a top 2 player of all time. Uh,
Mhm.
Some have him 1, some have him 2. Not going to get into that, but he's one of the 2 greatest players in the history of the NBA. So you never want to bet against a guy like that. But at the same time, he can only do so much. And offensively, he's been doing just about all that he can. And when you've got him surrounded by Russell Westbrook, Anthony Davis is in and out of the lineup, and then it's just a bunch of role players, and only like a couple of those role players are actually higher end role players. Like a guy like Malik Monk has looked really, really good, and I think he was very a great pickup for them, but he's not enough to provide what they need. And so I guess while I think they'll easily, not easily, because saying anything easily about the Lakers this year is just kind of foolish because nothing has been easy for them. It's been a
Hmm.
struggle all year. But I think they will make the play in. But at the same time, it's like there's a very real possibility that they get knocked out. Like if they go against the Timberwolves, one thing that I don't think a lot of people are talking about with the Timberwolves in the play-in game and in the playoffs this year is we're going to be seeing Anthony Edwards in a playoff setting for the first time in his career. Remember what happened when we saw John Morant in a playoff setting for the first time in his career? He averaged over 30 points per game and looked absolutely insane. Luka Doncic in his first playoff series looked absolutely insane. And while I don't necessarily put Anthony Edwards on the same tier as those guys, I do think when we see Anthony Edwards in the playoffs this year, we could watch a guy like kind of have his coming out moment of, hey, this is who I am. And if I make the playoffs, like with Jason Tatum, we've seen it too. Uh, Particularly last year in that series against the Nets, Jason Tatum put the league on notice where he averaged over 30 points per game in that playoff series. And Anthony Edwards, people are kind of sleeping on the fact that, if the Lakers go against the Timberwolves, while I don't want to put a ton of money on Cat and D'Lo necessarily, they do have a good supporting cast, and we could watch Anthony Edwards just absolutely take that playoff leap that a lot of these young guys end up taking during their first playoff appearances. And I don't necessarily want to bet against that either. And then you also have the Clippers, who, if they go against honestly, if the Lakers go against the Clippers in the play-in tournament, you might think this is blasphemous. Your audience may absolutely kill me and go dislike all of my videos, and that's fine. But if the Lakers go against the Clippers in the play-in tournament, I have to pick the Clippers. And not because of a roster, not because of a roster thing, but because of the coaching aspect of it. Ty Lue is one of the best coaches in the entire NBA, and his mid game adjustments, his understanding of X's and O's, the way he uses these junk defenses to throw teams off and get the ball out of their star players' hands, the offensive sets that he's running with a less than ideal a less than ideal cast to run these offensive sets, it's really, really impressive to watch and see how he's able to figure out in the midst of a game how to beat the other team. And while I don't necessarily think, I'm not guaranteeing or anything that the Lakers are going to lose to the Clippers, but the Clippers have a very realistic shot of winning a play-in game against the Lakers. And I mean, if I'm the Lakers, I wouldn't want to go against the Timberwolves or the Clippers. They will likely have to go up against at least one of them, given that the Clippers and Timberwolves are the 7th and 8th seed right now,
Hmm.
and I believe the Lakers are ninth or
Yeah,
10th seed.
19.
And then who knows who's going to end up getting that 10th spot? Honestly, the Lakers going against like the Pelicans or the Spurs or the Kings, that doesn't scare me. I think the Lakers will win that pretty easily. But the Timberwolves and Clippers, in my opinion, if you're a Lakers fan, you have to pray that those guys drop out of the play-in tournament or one of them just ends up falling to the 10th seed and the Lakers are able to sneak into that 7th or 8th seed. And in my opinion, the Timberwolves and the Clippers are worst case scenario for them. I do think, it's LeBron James. And if that team is healthy, if Anthony Davis is back, if Russell Westbrook is somehow able to figure things out, if their supporting cast is able to step up a little bit more, they could easily make the playoffs. Now, in the playoffs, it's a whole entire different story on if I would bet on them to get out of the first round. But we can discuss that if you want. But in the play-in tournament, I think they will easily make it. But when those play-in games come, things are kind of up in the air, in my
Hmm.
opinion.
So I don't think we'll get pushed out the play-in tournament just because of the teams behind us. I'm like Yes, I know we just got our asses handed us by the Pelicans. I love to see them try and do that again. But
Right.
right now, I don't like our chances against the Clippers. And, like you said, Lakers fans aren't going to be too happy hearing that, including myself. And any other year, I'd have a big problem with you saying that. The difference is we're playing in a year where Russell Westbrook's our starting point guard. So if that's the kind of scenario we're thrown into, hey, we're probably not going to make it that far. The Timberwolves, I'm a little bit less worried about. As much as you mentioned,
Yeah, I would be less worried about the Timberwolves than
Mhm,
I would be the Clippers. I think Clippers are kind of the ones to worry about. But yes,
mhm.
the Timberwolves, I think they have a much better shot against them.
Because I do think Anthony Davis will be back for the playoffs. Let's pray. Let's knock on wood. Let's just hope to God, he doesn't break another bone. I love
Right.
Anthony Davis, but day to day Davis is his nickname for a reason.
Right.
The Timberwolves, I believe Anthony Davis will have his way with Karl Anthony Towns. I don't trust D'Angelo Russell in clutch
Absolutely.
scenarios. I will give you this: Edwards is going to be a scary obstacle to overcome. But if it's just him, I think just out of pure talent, at some point we can say, "Hey, we're going to win that game." The thing
Mhm.
is with the Clippers, I've heard rumors that Paul George is going to be back, and if Paul George is
Right.
coming back and we're getting beat by the Clippers without him, I'm scared.
Right.
They've even got better picking up Covington, picking up Powell. I know Powell's injured right now, but even Covington just playing, that's a scary sight to see, especially if we're struggling the way we are, where we can't contain the Pelicans without Zion. Granted, I love CJ
Hmm.
McCollum. I think he's a very underrated player in this league, but that's for another
Hmm.
argument. I'm not confident in us. There's one ideal scenario for me here. We somehow play the Timberwolves, we make it in the plan, and then somehow, some way, the Grizzlies manage to get into the first or the second seed. I like our
Yeah.
chances against the Grizzlies compared to the other teams. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be no easy task beating the Grizzlies. John Morant is playing one hell of a season. We'll get into that in a little bit. But the Grizzlies are a little bit less experienced than the other two. One team's coming off
Right.
a championship run where they made it there, lost sadly, and I don't know how they lose that many games in a row. But that's not for this argument. And then the Warriors, who are notorious for sending LeBron home.
Right.
I'm not happy to play either one of those teams. Granted, I still think we beat the Suns last year if AD doesn't go down, but I'm not going to try to spark up too much controversy here.
Yeah. No,
I do
you hit the nail on the head.
I do believe that Lakers have a shot. Is it very big? No, it's not. But like you mentioned at the start of this, it's really hard to bet against LeBron James.
Hmm.
And then
And you mentioned with the Clippers, like Robert Covington and Norman Powell, if he's somehow back, which I don't know what the timetable for his return is. And then if they get Paul George back, like you look at the wings on the Clippers compared to the Lakers, and Robert Covington obviously isn't like he's not the greatest player in the NBA. Obviously, he's not a top 25 player in the league, but you know, matching up against some of those other Lakers wings, those guys are going to have a field day just because there's not going to be many guys that can match up against them. The Lakers defense, last year they were such a good defense. They were one of the best defenses in the NBA, and that was kind of their calling card all year. And they sacrificed a lot of that defense in the offseason. And so going up against a team like the Clippers, I mean, that's just a matchup nightmare because the wings that the Clippers are going to have at their disposal compared to what the Lakers do, um, it's just going to be. It's like you said, it's worst case scenario. I don't like the Lakers' chances as much against the Clippers.
you also just nailed the nail in the coffin right there because Robert Covington, like you said, not a top 25 player. You could argue that he's up there in the high 30s, early 40s. I mean, you could
Mm-hmm.
even argue lower than that. I think he's a bit higher. I think his defense is a bit overlooked, but he'll look
Mm-hmm.
like Kawhi Leonard for the Clippers if he's going against Trevor Ariza. So,
Right, exactly.
so I'm
And
not.
real quick,
Anybody scares me when Trevor Ariza is going to be the main defender, and I don't
can
know why
teams
fans will.
stop? I want teams to stop signing Trevor Ariza because for some reason he always ends up on a team that like has championship aspirations, and I'm like, guys, Trevor Ariza is not that guy anymore.
Mhm.
He's not this elite 3-and-D wing that he used to be. So his defense is not near what it used to be. His 3-point shooting is not near what it used to be. I just don't understand why teams keep signing him and trading for him.
Well, I mean, as you can clearly see, the Lakers thought this was 2010 with how
Right.
this roster is formatted. So,
Right.
I see why they signed him. If that's the scenario that they're going for, the all 2010s team, go for it. That makes sense. But if you watched him last year, sure, he played all right at best in some scenarios. He's
Right.
not he's not deserving of 15 to 20 minutes a night and getting five,
Mm-hmm.
6 shots a night. We don't want to see that. We don't need
Mm-hmm.
Trevor Ariza playing valuable minutes in an NBA game. We're up 30, which we never are. Throw him in. That's fine. I probably shouldn't say that because we've blown like two 30-point leads this year already. So maybe just don't play Trevor Ariza. That might be the best for both sides here.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving into it, like we just mentioned, we don't want to play the Suns, but the Suns have just lost 2 games without CP3. I think everybody knows that CP3 is the heartbeat of that team. He's not going to put up the most points per game in the league anymore. He's not going to put up 20 points a night like he used to. He'll give you a solid 15 and 8. But a lot of teams are really undervaluing Chris Paul's impact on this team. A lot of people assume this is Devin Booker's team because he's putting up the best points per game stats, blah blah blah. This is Chris Paul's team. I think maybe me and you can both agree on that, unless you got a Devin Booker
Right.
stand.
No,
But
no, I think you're absolutely right.
I think Chris Paul's absence has been greatly missed by the Suns players. And do you think that CP's threes, missing games here and there, even injury issues, do you think that's going to be an issue for the Suns down the line?
It definitely could be an issue for them in the playoffs. Even last year, it was a COVID thing, but they were without Chris Paul for some time in the playoffs, or something like that. I forget what the exact scenario was. But as far as the rest of the regular season goes, I actually think losing Chris Paul could work to their advantage, just in terms of getting a favorable matchup for the playoffs, because right now they're sitting at the 1 seed. Depending on how the play-in tournament rolls out, they could end up having to play Minnesota, the Clippers, the Lakers, Pelicans, Portland, whoever ends up in those play-in spots. Um, but if they slide to the 2 seed or the 3 seed, they're going to be going up against. They're going to have to end up going up against like Denver, and we know they have Denver's number, like they did last year. Obviously, if Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. are back, it's going to look a lot different. But we've seen them against the Nuggets. We've seen them against Jokic, and while Jokic did have an incredible playoff series against them, they were able to beat Denver handedly. It was not a problem for them. And then Dallas, while I absolutely love Luka Doncic, and I think he's an incredible player, and I think he has that playoff mode that we've seen at this point. That when he flips that switch, when playoff time rolls around, he's going to be on an entirely different level, and he could arguably be the best player in an entire series. I just don't think their supporting cast is good enough. So the Suns could potentially, I mean, right now they're pretty far and above everybody else. Even the 2, 3, and 4 seeds, they're way above them. I think Golden State is still 6 games back from Phoenix. So while it's not likely that they fall out of the 1 seed, I think they'll be able to scrape together enough wins to keep that 1 seed. If they do fall to the 2, 3, 4 seed, which is absolute worst case scenario, I still think matchup wise in the playoffs, they'll be just fine, as long as they get Chris Paul back, which it sounds like they will. Now, again, like you said, if a Chris Paul injuries, if these Chris Paul injuries start showing up in the playoffs, definitely time to sound the alarms, because I think their team, maybe this is an exaggeration, I think their team falls apart without Chris Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Paul is just such an incredible floor general. I think Monty Williams is one of the arguably a top, 1, 2, 3 coach in the entire NBA right now. But without when you go from playing with Chris Paul for this long, for 2 years now, losing him, it's kind of hard to recover from that. So if the injury thing does become a factor in the playoffs, I think their chances of making another trip to the finals decreases significantly.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think, like I mentioned earlier, he's obviously the heartbeat of that team. No Chris Paul, no championship. I think that's kind of written all over the Phoenix Suns. Do I think he'll be
Mm-hmm.
healthy come playoff time? Yeah, I do. I also do believe this is probably going to be his last heartbeat season, if that makes sense. I think he'll still be with. He's obviously still going to be with the Suns, but
Hmm.
I think this is going to be the last. Would you call this? I tend to call this season great. He's averaging over 10 assists, so I'm going to call it great. I think this is going to be his last great season
Right.
playing basketball. I think he's obviously going to be. I think he's going to be a solid player till he retires. I mean, that's just how he is. A lot of
Hmm.
players don't realize, if you play a certain way when you get older, it won't impact you as much as other players. That's why players with the highest IQs tend to play longer in the NBA.
Right.
That's why Russell Westbrook's doing so bad right now. I always call him the Cam Newton of the NBA.
I think that's a great
Heavily
comparison. Yeah.
relied so heavily on your athleticism, and then once the athleticism even takes a slight dip, you're done. They've relied on that for so long. They haven't developed high IQ, and
Right.
it's just struggle to watch. So Chris Paul, obviously, I think the second highest IQ player in this league, third if you want to throw Draymond in there. I think LeBron's
Right.
obviously number one, but now we have to talk
Yeah.
about somebody who's been on a tangent. Unless you want to throw a quick comment in.
Yeah. Real quick about Chris Paul. I just wanted to say something about about how this could be kind of his last season where we see him produce at this level. I I think a lot of people there seems to be a trend right now where these older players are still being like Kyle Lowry's another good example. Chris
Mm-hmm.
Paul is a great example. LeBron is obviously the best example. We're seeing these guys contribute at such a high level up until these ripe ages that we're seeing them play at now. And like you said, Chris Paul's game is not predicated on athleticism; it's predicated on pure skill and IQ. But Father Time, at the end of the day, is undefeated, and while the passing that we've seen from Chris Paul is there, still the shooting and the ability to get a bucket, I think we will probably see that start to drop off after this season. He's been more than serviceable this year, averaging I think around 14, 15 points per game, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
which is really really good for that age. But it has steadily started to decline over the past few years, and I think, like you said, next year could be the year that we kind of see. Okay, Chris Paul isn't. Maybe he's not a guy that should be your number two option. Obviously, Devin Booker's the number one
Mm-hmm.
option, but maybe Chris Paul is not the guy who should be your a relied on scoring threat.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Chris Paul. I think he's an incredible player, but I agree. I think this year is kind of his last chance. And maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe people will get mad about that, but I really do think that it's this year or it's not going to happen for him to win a championship unless he joins a team after his son's years to
Mm-hmm.
join a contender and try and get a ring that way. But yeah, I just don't see a scenario where they're able to continue to make
Mm-hmm.
deep runs in the playoffs if he's not producing at a unreasonably good level for his
Mm-hmm.
age.
No, I definitely agree. I think this is the last year Chris Paul could win a championship, and everybody points to him and say, "Hey, he's the reason why that team did it." Obviously, he still has a chance to do it. We've seen it time and time again, ring chasing. I don't think Chris Paul ever will ring chase, but
Right.
you know, is Chris Paul? You don't know. I mean, who knows if Rajon Rondo finally got to him and he's going to ring chase just so he can talk back to Rajon. The only thing I can really say is I still think he'll be a solid player for at least the next
Yeah, for sure.
4 years, and it won't be
Hmm.
considered ring chasing. But he's not going to win unless he goes to like a really damn good team after this year. Unless he pulls a LeBron and does the same thing over and over again, even next year, even though they're about the same age. But you never know in the NBA, especially lately with older guys still playing at decent levels. Now, a young guy who's playing at one hell of a level. I think we both knew what we were about to mention. John Morant here, 52 last night, 46 the game before that, and a couple games before that, 44. John Morant's been on a tear. I don't think there's anybody young. I don't think there's any other young guy. I think he's. I mean, Luca, obviously, Luca, and Trey Young are like the three young guys really running the league right now. I don't say
Right.
Jason Tatum. I have a bias against him, but that's me. What were you just like before we get like too deep into it? John Morant. What are your quick thoughts on his game?
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing for me last year was, he proved he was a great finisher. We saw the passing ability that was there, but for me, it's always been, is he going to be able to achieve that scoring to become like a superstar player? And I firmly believe that he would, but this was kind of the year that I was like, okay, let's see it. Like let's see him reach that level. And I was like, if this is the year that he does it, this guy is a superstar. He's an unbelievable talent, and obviously we're seeing he's doing that. He's doing what I hoped he would do, and I think it speaks to the third year leap that we see from a lot of these young guys. Obviously, his rookie season was very good. His second season took a step back in some areas. Definitely saw some things that needed to be worked on, and then now we're seeing it happen. Now it's like, okay, third year, this guy is a superstar, and I don't think anyone can deny that now. He is a superstar talent, and
Hmm.
I'm a little bit biased because I'm from Kentucky, and he went to college at Murray State. Um, and his story is just so incredible. I think he has one of the greatest stories about being discovered to become such a highly touted prospect. For those of you who don't know, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but the way John Morant was discovered was this scout for Murray State was at an AAU tournament. And the way this AAU tournament was set up was they had the main AAU tournament with all like the big prospects and stuff. And then you had this auxiliary gym where other teams were playing, maybe not the highest touted prospects in the world. They were the guys who were playing in this gym. And so the scout, uh, he was hungry, so he goes to a vending machine, and the vending machine happened to be next to this auxiliary gym where kind of the lesser known guys were playing. And so he stopped in and starts watching, and he sees this guy playing, and he's like, wow, who the heck is this kid? And it was John Morant. Eventually, John Morant gets an offer to go to Murray State. He goes to Murray State, and the rest is history from there. But his journey to the NBA from being completely unknown, not being ranked or scouted by any major outlet, to now being a superstar who is in MVP conversations. And while I'm not going to get into whether or not he is a top three candidate or anything like that, but uh, he is still just this talent that we don't get to see very often. He's incredible, and the story just makes it even better.
I mean, if you know anything, we probably know the Pelicans are kicking themselves right now. But
Yeah,
no,
yeah, and that's another thing is John Morant. One thing that these young players that we don't see very often is these young players embracing the small market teams that they're drafted to. Zion obviously said all of the right things, but now it's kind of clear his actions say differently. And with John Morant, from day one, he embraced Memphis. He embraced the city. He embraced the fans. And while I think fans do a great job of embracing these players, it's not always reciprocated. And I
Mhm.
think John Morant deserves a ton of praise for being drafted into maybe a less than ideal situation in Memphis in terms of where they were at when he was drafted and making the most of it and showing a ton of love to the city of Memphis, showing a ton of love to the fans and embracing the grit and grind culture that they have. And I think that's awesome. I don't think we see that enough from these guys who, are top three overall picks.
Hmm. No, I definitely agree. I think Zion's actions have spoken louder than his words. I mean, the man looks like a defensive lineman for the Patriots or something out here. Uh, I do think John Morant's gonna. He reminds me. I never agree with Stephen A. I never do, but he had a decent take. He reminds me a little bit of a taller AI.
Yeah.
He's just that guy. He can score. He doesn't need anybody else to score, and he'll still win you the game just by his scoring. I think he's going to start showing that in the next coming seasons. I think he's finally getting more comfortable with being that scoring option instead of trying to be all around not more all around. He's going more into scoring and all that. Lately, I mean, especially this past month, he's played he's played great. I mean, there's no buts around it. I mean, has he scored less than 20 this month? I don't think so. So
Yeah.
There you go for a young guy just coming into this league, and then when you consider the number one draft pick who was taken ahead of him is at home on a couch and has missed probably more games than he's played, I think the Grizzlies are happy they didn't get that number one overall pick because I'm pretty sure
Right.
even they would have drafted Zion.
Yeah, and while the Pelicans are kicking themselves, Zion was the clear number one overall pick.
Mm-hmm.
I had the hot take because I was biased at the time. I was like, guys, I don't know, maybe you could take John Morant number one, and it wouldn't actually be that bad of a pick. But obviously, if you had that number one overall pick, you were going to take Zion. No one was going to take Ja over him. And obviously, hindsight is 2020. It's really easy to say now. John Morant maybe could have gone number one overall, and no one would have been upset about it. But no one was going to say that at the time. And while it's hard to compare them because we haven't seen Zion play since literally last year, um, John Morant has reached a level that you have to sit there and ask. Zion's incredible, but you know, John Morant provides a lot as well,
Mm-hmm.
and he's clearly a superstar talent. And I think he's just scratching the surface of what he's capable of.
No, I definitely agree. I think no matter who had the first overall pick, it was going to go Zion. I honestly have no idea what's going on through Zion's head. I mean, I love the guy; he's a great guy. I have his jersey and everything, but you know, it's been hard watching him off court. You don't see much of him, but when you do see him, it's always a, is that what's going on? Or you hear stories about this and that. I mean, personally, in my opinion, I don't think he's going to be in New Orleans for much longer. He clearly hasn't embraced it that much. He's embraced the food. That's about it. I don't think he's embraced the fans or the city or the culture. I like Zion, but he's going to be in New York soon. I think every NBA fan can see that a mile away. He's going to go team up with RJ up there. And I think RJ, he's putting the league on notice too lately. I think RJ
Yeah,
Barrett, mm,
I like I like Zion as a person. I think a lot of this that a lot of people don't realize is when he was drafted, he was saying all the right things. It was clear that there was a PR team behind him saying, like, oh, if you get asked this, this is what you need to say. Say all the right things, give the fans comfort, and then behind the scenes, we'll do whatever we need to do. And I it's a tough situation because I understand player empowerment and everything, and I think the player empowerment movement has been a good thing in allowing players to take control of their careers. But at the same time, if you're a small market fan of these guys like teams like New Orleans, it's tough because you get these talents, and it happened with Anthony Davis as well. It's like these guys are incredible, incredible players that are on your team, but you're kind of on borrowed time.
mhm.
And while the Pelicans, I think if they add Zion to this roster, I think this team doesn't just become a play-in team. I think this team with Zion could become a solidly playoff team, a top six seed. I think Zion is that good, and I think the roster around them, you've got guys like CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones has looked awesome. I think he was a great pick, arguably one of the two biggest steals of the draft. And Jonas Valanciunas, who we know what he is, he's a very, very good player. And if you add Zion to that mix, I think they're solidly a playoff team. And I don't know if he sees that and just doesn't care, or if he doesn't realize that, or if his camp is not wanting him to play for New Orleans. But it's just a sad situation. It truly bothers me. I know it bothers New Orleans Pelicans fans. I don't think it's necessarily good for the league. Um,
Mhm.
it's just a bad situation.
I do like the player empowerment. I like it being able to take control of your own destiny, but there are some scenarios where it's like it's really hard watching it as a fan of the NBA, point of view because what benefit do you have to watch Pelicans basketball if the players don't even want to play there? It's hard. You really want to see the players that you draft embrace them like you embrace you as you embrace them. And unfortunately, that's just not how the situation goes a bunch of times. I think Zion's in a weird predicament where he wants to get traded, but realizes, hey, my value's not too high. Blah blah blah. I'm concerned. I like Zion.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you can get this all together, lose some weight. Hopefully, we don't need another Charles Barkley in the league. As much as I love Charles himself, we don't need
Mm-hmm.
another round mounted rebounder. That won't work in today's game. And
Right.
then just to round it out, for this episode. The most improved teams going into this league so far. Do you have any hot takes?
So there are three teams that I think you can look at as the biggest improvers. Obviously, you've got teams like Chicago who they built through free agency and they made smart signings, getting Alex Caruso, DeMar DeRozan, and Lonzo Ball. I think that was great for them. Uh, they traded for Vucevic, but when I read this question, when you sent me the topics, to me it was like the teams that had this talent that kind of took a leap and grew together and developed into the team that they are now. So there are three teams that I really look at as good examples of that. The first one is the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cleveland Cavaliers, they had Darius Garland, who at one time during his rookie season was literally considered the worst player in the NBA. He is now an all-star. You have Jarrett Allen, who I think a lot of people knew Jarrett Allen was going to be a good NBA player. I don't think anyone expected him to become the all-star caliber player that he is now. And even though he kind of got in on a technicality, he was still getting a significant amount of votes and was in the hunt for an all-star selection outright, even without injuries. And Isaac Okoro is another guy who has developed and become an integral part of this team. Jetty Osman even has been, an integral part of this team as a 3-and-D guy. Kevin Love has accepted his role as a six-man, even though the last 2 years haven't been kind to him. He hasn't always seemed invested. And now, he looks great for them. He's personally my pick for six-man of the year. And he's played such an integral role for them. And I think this team they just developed. They took the time, and even though it wasn't always fun, even though things didn't always go right, like with Kevin Love not even wanting to play, with Kevin Porter Jr., throwing fits in the locker room, it hasn't been smooth sailing, but they stuck with it and they built. So that's one team that I think this definitely applies to. Another team in the Eastern Conference, the Toronto Raptors. The Toronto Raptors are never going to be a free agency destination due to location, due to market size, due to weather, all this stuff. They're just never going to be a free agent destination.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at their starting five right now, and in my opinion, they have, just in terms of talent, they have one of the most talented starting fives in the NBA when they're healthy. You have Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, and Pascal Siakam. Those are all five very good NBA players. Two of them are all-star caliber players. And Gary Trent Jr. has taken a leap this year. I think he'll continue to improve. Scotty Barnes, we're just seeing the beginning of him as a guy, as a potential future all-star. And then OG Anunoby took another leap this year, and he's an almost 20-point per game scorer and one of the best 3-and-D wings in the entire NBA. And they built all of that through not just through the draft. They built all of that through the G League, which is something we don't see very often. You look at guys like Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet. Those were G League players, and they're now all-star level players and primary options for this team. And so props to Toronto for how well they've been able to build. And then one team in the Western Conference who they've struggled, they've had their ups and downs, things didn't always look good, but they stuck with it. It's the Minnesota Timberwolves. Getting Anthony Edwards, I think, was huge. They've given him all the opportunity to develop into what he is now. Karl Anthony Towns is what he is. We know what he's capable of. D'Angelo Russell accepting his role that he's in now. I did a video on his improvements this year and how he's kind of taken a back seat instead of being the scoring guard that we saw in Brooklyn. He's now this facilitator. He's the passer for this team. He's the guy who's going to be making the plays and running the offense. And for him to accept that role and take a step back and be like, okay, I'm not going to be the go-to guy anymore. I'm not going to be the primary scoring option. I'm going to let Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards go to work, and I'm just going to play make. And he's also been a very underrated defender. And I think his improvements and his acceptance of this role has done a lot for this team. And then even their bench, even some of their role players have looked really good in terms of how they're developing. Jared Vanderbilt is literally looking like a diet Dennis Rodman. He's an insanely good rebounder for his height, one of the best offensive rebounders in the entire NBA. He's a really good cutter, great finisher. His three ball needs to improve. He needs a little bit more offensively before I'm ready to make any crazy takes about him. But, he's a great bench piece for them on a really, really favorable contract. I'm pretty sure he's only making like $1.5 million over the next 3 years, which is insane for a guy that plays such a big role for them. And he's such an incredible defender. And then you also have a guy like Jaden McDaniels, it's taken him some time to develop and come into his own. But last night we saw him, he had a great game. He had a big game for them. He made clutch buckets. He was playing a primary role for this team. We all knew he was an incredible defender. He's just so lengthy. He's so quick on his feet. He can recover if he gets beaten off the dribble. He can block shots. He can get steals. He's just a really, really good defender. And then his three-point shot is slowly starting to develop a little bit. If that gets more consistent, I mean, this team has a lot of talent on it. And instead of just blowing things up when things didn't look like they were going well, like last year, everyone was saying, Karl Anthony Towns is going to want out. It's time to trade D'Lo and just build around Anthony Edwards. Instead, they were like, we're going to stick with it. We're going to see what we can make happen. And now, I mean, they're the 7th seed. They're solidly fighting for a top 6 seed in the Western Conference. And props to them for not giving up on it, because a lot of teams, they face a lot of pressure from the fans. They face a lot of pressure from ownership. They face a lot of pressure from the front office. And instead of blowing things up, they decided, let's give it some time. Let's let it work out. Let's let these guys develop. And then it's worked out for them, at least so far. We'll see how the play-in tournament goes. But, it's worked out for them.
No, I definitely agree. I think Patrick Beverley was an extremely underrated pickup for the Timberwolves.
Absolutely.
He's been that guy. He's been the vocal leader. I think he's been that guy in the locker room too. I think that doesn't get talked about enough. He's brought a swagger to this team.
Mm-hmm.
And you also mentioned them earlier, the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think they take the nod for the most improved, because there was a point at this time
Absolutely.
the season where when Sexton went down, everybody said, okay, well, they were doing so good, but that's a wrap on the Cavs season. And they're the 5th seed right now. They didn't get just booted out like that. They're doing better than teams like Charlotte, who have LaMelo Ball. Jarrett
Mm-hmm.
Allen has been playing great ball. I know, like you mentioned, he also got into the All-Star game by a technicality, but let's not sit here and act like he didn't deserve to be there. Jarrett
Right.
Allen is a filthy defender, and everyone wants to make jokes about him getting dunked on every clip. It's because he's jumping up with people. I don't see your favorite guy jumping up as much as Jarrett Allen does
Right.
to block the
Exactly.
shot, but
Exactly.
that is something that doesn't get talked about enough. Like, if you get dunked on, I'll give you some credit. You jumped up, you know, compared to the guys that just stand there and watch you dunk. I think the Cavs take it. I mean, obviously you can go with the Chicago Bulls, but I don't like seeing rebuilds as big as like that, where you just do everything not homegrown. You get Vucevic, who's made the All Star game a couple times. You go get Alex Caruso, who's been a solid defender. Who I also believe Alex Caruso's had a great jump in performance these past couple years, and I
Mm-hmm.
am so hurt that we didn't re-sign him because I think he's
Oh, that's baffling to me. It still blows my mind.
there's so many things that blow my mind with the Lakers. Could have Alex Caruso back, could have DeMar DeRozan, could have Buddy
Right.
Hield, could have Kyle Lowry, but no, THT's too valuable, but he can't dribble a basketball or even play defense anymore now, so there you go. Sorry, Lakers fans. I'm hurt saying that, but it's the cold, hard truth. But the Chicago Bulls have been nasty. Chicago Bulls have been one of the best teams in the league, obviously. I know, right? Great analysis. It's just not homegrown, so I'm not a big of a fan of the rebuild as I would be of somebody
Right.
like the
I,
Cavs
I
or the
give more
Timberwolves.
credit to I give more credit to teams that build through the draft and relying on developing talent than I do teams that just go out and sign free agents. And the Bulls, and that's not me saying I dislike the Bulls. I
Mhm.
don't dislike the Bulls. I really like their team. I like a lot of the guys on their team, and they've been really fun to watch this year. But yeah, I'm going to give more credit to teams like Cleveland, teams like Toronto, teams like Minnesota that stuck with the talent that they drafted and just focused on developing them instead of just trying to go out and get free agents.
And then for next year going in, I mean, Tyrese Halliburton's going to be a nasty pickup for the Pacers going into the new
Oh yeah.
season.
Hmm.
So, you could look at a bunch of teams. I think most teams have done things right. I mean, you could look at almost any team in the league and say, hey, they've done one thing right. Like, hell, even the Knicks, they're going to get rid of Kemba. They've done something right. And, I mean, every team's done something right, except if your name begins with an L. Lakers did
Right.
not do anything right this year. But that's neither here nor there. Hopefully we can speak again soon. Hey, I really want to thank you for coming on this episode of the podcast. And
Yeah,
again,
thank you. Really appreciate
Alex
it.
Hoops on YouTube. Make sure you guys are go subscribe, check out his videos. But again, you guys probably are here from him or already know who he is. But hey, thank you for coming on, man.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Remember, links will be in the description to the YouTube channels, videos, Twitter accounts, and everything. Thank you guys for tuning into this episode. And our 1 year anniversary video will be coming out this Thursday. We're going to have a double upload that day. I can't wait to share those videos with you guys. And thank you guys all and tune into the next one.